All right, we are live. I am Dave, the IT guy, and tonight we have a little different conversation than we normally do. We're going to talk to the CEO of Second Sight Labs. Now, she's very intelligent and very active in our field, so if you come up with questions, they better be tough because she might stump us back, and we have to watch out for ourselves here. Teri is a lot of things in this world, a pen tester first and foremost. She's a self-proclaimed AWS perfectionist, maybe is rewording for her, but I think she can best tell you herself about who she is and what she does by just inviting her onto the air. Teri, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. So,
Thanks for having.
you know, having folks like you on is great because I got to tell you that a lot of times we talk to other techs and other people who are actively in the field, but we are not always in the leadership roles. We're not always having to deal with a lot of other things. And one of the things about inviting you on the air was attractive for me to have you was there's reasons. And the fact that you appear to be pretty stout yourself in this field. And, the rest of us might have to watch our P's and Q's. So if you can, just take a little minute, tell us a little bit about who you are, where you are, what you do, how you're going to do it, all that kind of stuff.
So I've done a lot of different things in my career, but currently I run a company called Second Sight Lab, as you mentioned, and we really want to focus on helping companies stop breaches. And the way we do that, specifically in the cloud, we do some training and we also do some pen testing. And so, I've been focused on software, security, web applications, e-commerce. I did back office programming for banks and things, a lot of different things. And so the focus is really taking all that knowledge and combined with the security and trying to figure out how to stop the breaches that are going on in the cloud specifically. And cloud specifically because about 8 years ago, I just got really interested in AWS and cloud. I looked at it when it first came out like everyone else, and I said, I'm not putting my e-commerce websites up there. But after reviewing it again, I got back into it and said, wow, Amazon's really doing some interesting things here. And that's what really kicked off a very strong interest in cloud security specifically. So that's what I focus on now. And, just wrote a class to help people, especially teams, understand who are moving to the cloud or in the cloud. What do the decision makers need to know for making those decisions that impact security? And the other thing is really focusing on, let us come in and tell you if you have some sort of gap in your security and trying to find new and interesting ways to do that and things that are really relevant to the breaches that we're seeing in the news. That's kind of what my focus has been on recently.
Excuse me. One of the things that you commented there was, being not willing to be an early adopter and then revisiting. What would you say to those who are still resisting putting their financial or other, maybe patient HIPAA or other, protected data in a cloud environment? What would you say now to those people that are resisting still?
I have a couple of interesting things that I think back to in my career. So when I started out, I worked in telecom, and I remember my boss was telling AT&T, there's no way I'm going to use your frame relay product. And frame relay is essentially, logical separation and networking. It's a cloud-based product. You're no longer have this fixed leaf line that costs you, well, back then it was like $20,000 a month. A point-to-point connection, you move to a different sort of logical separation because it's cheaper, because you have contracts with those companies, you trust them to implement the security, and you kind of have to do the same analogy or analysis in the cloud. When you're moving to the cloud, you look at things and you say, well, do I trust this company? You do an assessment on their security and their security controls, and you try to figure out if you're going to trust that or not. One of the biggest challenges I had initially and why I initially didn't want to move to the cloud was because when I started moving to outsourced services, I realized I didn't have the logs to fix things or to figure out, security incidents or what's going wrong. And I think that's one of the issues moving to the cloud that a lot of security people face. but more and more tools are coming out in that space to help you with, kind of getting that insight. At the end of the day, it comes down to, do you trust the cloud provider? Have you done an assessment of their controls? There's a lot of things that companies do where they outsource, and it's a choice. It's maybe not the right choice for everybody, but there are a lot more controls in the cloud now. And there's been a lot of assessments on them, even by like the U.S. government and things. And I think the right cloud providers are doing a good job. So.
Excuse me. One of the things that you commented about security people and things, and one of the things that we hear about in the news relatively often, I guess, maybe not all the time, but is how containers and others data sources are being found by good guys and the bad guys. And then the answer generally has been, oh, somebody left a tick box checked or unchecked or whatever the case may be. So from your perspective or your company's perspective even, how often has that been the answer for any pen tests or other data reviews that you're doing for cloud-based services?
So when I do a penetration test in the cloud, I really focus on both application security and cloud security. If you think about it, the cloud is just one huge software platform, right? Everything's automated, everything's virtualized. And so really going in and checking all those configurations and making sure something isn't completely exposed is part of that. But in my particular case, I haven't found a lot of things just completely exposed to the internet, but it does happen a lot. It happens way more than it should. I think that's one of the major problems moving to the cloud, and I think part of that has to do with the fact that people are deploying things kind of outside the normal channels that we used to use, and kind of being able to deploy things, without those restrictions, which are great for developers. They can move much faster, but at the same time, you may have a security problem. When it comes to containers specifically, a lot of the misconfigurations it is a lot of misconfiguration that's causing this. In terms of, when you configure a container, you have to understand the security practices and not give it root access or privileged access. And people that don't understand this, developers go out there and try to deploy an application, and their focus is really on, how do I make this work? It's not on, what is the implication of this flag that I just flipped that now provides this container, a lot of permission that someone could exploit. So yeah, I think a lot of it is that misconfiguration issue when it comes to containers and everything else in the cloud. But there's another thing that, the cloud is different, but it's not different. When you deploy an application in a container, or like at RSA, I just talked about serverless. When you're deploying these applications in the cloud, they're still applications, and a lot of them are still vulnerable to the same flaws that would occur if you were deploying them directly on a host. And so those same vulnerabilities still exist. What happens after you exploit them is what changes. How do I get out of this container? How do I leverage this exploit in some way in the cloud may change, but a lot of the things come down to leaving things open, misconfigured, and also just the same vulnerabilities that you had before.
Outside of taking these developers to a training class, on security-based things, what can be done? Is it just responsible, secure software programming guidelines? Is it enacting a security team to review things once a developer is done, or whomever is using that space? What, if anything, can really be done to start mitigating the, air quotes here, the human factor?
So I think, I think a lot of people realize now that trying to have that human review is very time consuming. It gets in the way, and generally, although security people have the best of intentions, a lot of times, the developers or whoever is trying to get the project launched will go to the executive leadership, and basically they'll bypass some of that. So I think we have to look at new ways of dealing with these sort of exceptions and, things to security problems. And one of the things I like to recommend, like in my class, is create some sort of pattern that is acceptable, that is really easy for developers to use, and then beyond that, implement monitoring, so you can watch what's going out, and every time you find a new flaw, you can sort of take that back, teach the developer what was wrong with it, You can fix your deployment processes. But basically, if you create a pattern that they can use that's easy to use, that's secure, and will handle most of the cases, and they can't change it, it has to be flexible enough for them, but then they will be happy to use it because it will make their jobs easier. So to give a little bit more of a specific example, when I worked at a company, first I worked at Capital One prior to the breach, and then after that, I went to another company and I built a whole DevOps pipeline. And within that pipeline, did things a lot differently and basically created templates that developers could use to make new services and create new systems that were secure by default. And they could just drop their code in and run. And so I think creating those sort of templates to help people do things that are secure and then having a process for dealing with those exceptions that's really efficient is helpful. And then on the flip side, or the other side of that is, you just monitor the environment, and when you see something going wrong, which we definitely did, we would go back and reiterate on our templates and teach the developers, what they should and shouldn't do.
For those just joining us, we are talking with Teri Radishel from Second Sight Labs, and one of the things I wanted to bring up that I'm going to surprise her with a little bit, although I did warn her off air, is that she is a proud holder of the GSE certification, which in a previous episode, we had a very robust discussion about how important certifications were and which ones as far as the security field goes. A GSE, though, is multiple efforts and a couple of multiple day real-time tasks. You're not just checking a few boxes and multiple guesses and moving on, correct? I mean, let's take a minute and tell everybody as much as you can how challenging that certification was to earn and what benefit that it's brought for you.
So, there's a lot of debate about certifications, but I definitely think that a certification shows you put time in and that you put in the effort to learn something new. So I'm a fan of certifications. I don't think just having one makes you an expert by any means, but I think they do have value. And of course, it depends which ones. And I think a lot of people, sort of respect the GSE, and I definitely respect it because I took it. It was very hard. I didn't pass the first time. I actually wrote a blog post on my whole experience that goes into great detail. But the first time I took it, you have this stack of only 2 feet tall books, and you're supposed to know every tool in those books and how to use them. And after I took it the first time, I kind of figured out, what I need to study, what I need to work on more, and how to approach it a little bit better, I guess. But yeah, it was definitely challenging. You go in for 2 days and you don't know exactly what you're going to get, and you get a series of questions across a broad range of different aspects of security. So there's some pen testing, there's some incident handling, there's some system configuration, and you just have to go at it as quickly as you can and try to answer all the questions. Definitely challenging experience. And yeah, I had to take it twice, but the second time I got it, so very happy.
Well, very nice. Congratulations. And yeah, that topic of whether or not they're valuable or, is just having the cert enough. And those type of certs, I think, and experience-based like a CISSP and others, where you have to have some time in grade, so to speak, before you can even sit for the test, I think are awesome. And I have seen the pre-qualifications for the GSE, and you can't just walk in and sit down and take the test. You have to have some knowledge behind your belt. So excellent. So I kind of diverged a little bit from our cloud talk, but let me roll back over that way. So, we've been talking about pen testing and cloud, and I'm not going to ask you to compare Amazon or AWS and Azure, but without getting this is better than that, do you see that both of these services tend to enable actors in the same way? Or do you feel like they are vastly different if someone was trying to maybe select one service over another, or even maybe an Oracle cloud service or something like that?
I think it's that just it comes down to looking at the security controls and how they're the same and how they're different in each cloud provider. So I think out of all of them, I think AWS and Azure are probably more similar. They're basically virtualizing, a software virtualized version of your data center in a way, but they will have differences in different services in them. I think the attacks are similar in that, one of the biggest ways people are getting into cloud environments is using credentials that have been stolen. So people check their credentials into GitHub, or, an attacker could go in and get those credentials off of a, like laptop. I've also just today saw that Office 365 has a new login page, and Azure have a new login page, and the attackers are already creating phishing pages out of those that are similar. So getting those, any way they can get those credentials, once they get in, then they can do anything, a cloud administrator can do, or whatever those credentials could do. So protecting those credentials is a big deal. MFA is a big deal. And then just the misconfigurations. I've seen, we heard a lot about S3 buckets. I think they got the big news flash at the beginning when attackers started realizing what the cloud is and how it works. But I've seen that in all three cloud providers. I've seen the top three cloud providers, that same type of service, that same kind of exposure. And then, of course, all the different things you can run in the cloud that can be exposed. So whether it's Docker container administrative ports or Elasticsearch, see a lot of Elasticsearch, MongoDB, those types of things exposed. All those things can occur in each of the cloud providers. So, it's just one big programmatic platform where misconfigurations can exist. And each time one cloud provider gets a service, the other one's trying to copy it. So it's going to be there. If it's not there right away, it'll probably be there soon. And so I really don't see a difference in the type of attacks, but the way the cloud providers work in terms of security controls, what you can do in each one differ somewhat. And then also, they'll have different ways that you use programming or different ways to access those different services.
Sounds a lot like the answers across the board is the human factor in and out, regardless that if someone's doing whatever they're doing, but they're not paying attention to the security side, they're going to open up a door. If that's truly the case, do you see, or is it already happening where any of these services are offering kind of a check and balance? So in an automated way, hey, you just spun up this whatever. Did you realize that this is open or that's open? Is any kind of tool like that already in place? Do you see it coming if it's not?
There are definitely both in the cloud a lot of tools and open source tools to help you with this. So I think all three cloud providers have an automated version of checking the CIS benchmarks, and there are CIS benchmarks both for, obviously if you're familiar with that, they have them for, Windows and any sort of operating system, but they also have them for the cloud providers, they have them for Kubernetes, and to some degree, some of those CIS benchmarks are already in the cloud provider sort of administrative or security dashboards where you can go run tools to find out if your systems are meeting CIS benchmarks. There are also open source tools that a lot of people are publishing different open source tools to go in and check either CIS benchmarks or other type of security checks, as well as commercial tools. So yeah, they're out there. Microsoft has Azure Security Center, and AWS has Security Hub, and I'm blanking out on Google's right now, but they have, they're trying to provide these dashboards to tell you what misconfigurations you may have in your environment. AWS has had another one for a long time called Trusted Advisor, which will tell you if you have OpenSSH ports and also some cost information. So they all have these tools. You just have to know they're there and turn them on, and also monitor them, of course.
Yeah, that definitely seems to be part of the, I don't know if I want to say problem, but part of the challenge that I see is once something is spun up in a cloud, monitoring it ongoing for changes and or any kind of benchmarking that you might have done for yourself. So, again, great suggestion, making sure that folks know. And for those of you that are just tuning in, Teri and I have been talking quite a bit about cloud and security and pen testing. But now we're going to kind of have a little bit of fun with it. So, Terry, have there been any kind of, I don't want to say odd, but are there any consistent finds? So you're talking about pen testing for your clients. Do you find a lot of the same types of things that are across the board, or do you have any stories about any kind of odd or weird thing that was just stumping you momentarily, at least?
Yeah, so in terms of things I find often, I kind of combined an assessment and a pen test. I can do either or, depending on what people want, and I do a little bit different things with each one. But when I do a pen test, I usually try to check best practices, and I find that a lot of people don't turn on logging. And if they're not turning on logging, that tells me they're not monitoring. And monitoring is huge in the cloud because you need to know if something went wrong. And so that's one thing I see. Also see administrative ports exposed to the cloud. In terms of pen testing and breaking in, I always ask to start with, besides just looking for something wide open and misconfigured, the typical way you're going to get in is through a web application vulnerability of some kind. So I also do that. And those really vary because I've had different applications with different sorts of, use cases. There's so many different components you can use in the cloud. In one case, I found that a customer was uploading a file to an S3 bucket, and they had all these checks in the web application, but then once you got past those, you could get a time-limited URL to upload to the bucket, and you could just bypass the entire website and get in and upload anything you want, malware, some sort of something to have an administrator send their keys back to you or whatever. But one that was really interesting recently and actually made me a little nervous after it happened was right before RSA, I was going to talk on serverless security, and I was doing a pen test on a serverless environment, and it was an API-only pen test. I had a Swagger file. I talk all about that in my RSA video, but basically I was a little frustrated because I couldn't find anything initially, and I usually find something worthy, of being in that high category. And so I wrote this fuzzer to go in and basically really quickly go through all the API endpoints and attack it. And I ended up finding something interesting. It was reflecting back the token to me that was used to authenticate to the API. And that was interesting. Of course, if you're getting your own token back, it's like, okay, go hack yourself, knock yourself out. That wasn't so interesting, but I thought, well, someone could get that out of the logs potentially and get into someone else's account. But then I thought, what if I replace this token with some code? Does that work? And it did. There was no sort of check on the token going through the API. So at that point, you could, put in some code to steal admin credentials or do all kinds of other things. But I wasn't sure if it was Amazon's problem or the customer's problem. So first I reported to Amazon, wondering if it was their service, and they said, oh, that customer's using some beta service, and they kind of acted like it was no big deal. So then I went back to the customer and I asked them if they were using that service. They said, oh, no, we're not using that. It's all our own code. We're doing this ourselves. Okay. So then I went and talked about it at RSA, obviously not talking about that specific customer, but the way I wrote the fuzzer and how I found the flaw. And then when I got back, the customer said, well, we really think that's a flaw in Amazon service. And then I got a little nervous that I had just exposed a problem with Amazon at RSA. So I told the customer to go back to Amazon and talk to them about it. It was a beta service, but I don't know for sure if it was an Amazon flaw or not. And it's been a couple months, so if it was, I'm sure they've fixed it by now. But that was kind of an interesting one where I was like, is this an Amazon flaw or is this the customer's flaw? And I haven't really followed up to find out which one it was at this point. But it definitely should be fixed by now.
Yeah, that's interesting when with a beta service like that you mentioned that, and the customer seems to think that it was all their own code, and Amazon actually possibly identified it as their own beta. So that's an interesting piece. I might have to send you a tweet in a month or two and see if any answers to that ever came without having to identify the folks, of course. But
yeah.
What so since we've been talking about these things, and now that COVID and like you said, the new login pages came up today, and the imposters are already popping up for phishing and scamming. how much of an uptick because of people working from home and the different approaches now that hackers might be taking? A lot of companies had to jump to the cloud in a hurry to try to maintain their business at all. Has there been a big change? Has there been an uptick in cloud attacks, or has there been a shift in the types of attacks, or has it all been pretty much the status quo?
So I try to, log in just about every day and look at what's going on. And one of the things I've noticed is, there are a lot of people kind of preying on fear. So there's a lot of mobile apps that are getting out there that are taking over phones and things. People are downloading these mobile apps for COVID. The other one would be the attacks on they're not really cloud related, but the attacks, as far as I know, on the unemployment systems, right? So everyone knows everyone's getting unemployment, so we've had the Nigerian folks out there attacking the Washington State unemployment system. You got Arkansas offline. Someone attacked Ohio because they didn't like that they're sending people back to work. So really going after the things that are impacted and that they know people are using as a result of COVID. We have people trying to get the COVID research, all those type of things. But in the cloud specifically, I have not seen as much recently as I saw before. I've seen more sort of ransomware. They're even going after hospitals, which is just so despicable. But so I've seen a lot more ransomware. And then, just your standard misconfiguration where someone left a bunch of data out open to the internet. But not specifically, I haven't seen an uptick in cloud in terms of the IaaS or the infrastructure service cloud. I haven't seen a lot there. Obviously, we've got the Zoom bombing, people trying to mess up people's videos. But that's what I've seen from the news. I obviously don't, I'm not in these companies. There could be other things going on they're not reporting, but that's what I see from the outside.
It's great that you mentioned Zoom bombing. I actually spent some time looking at videos where people have Zoom bombed and then uploaded their videos to the web. And while my company uses Zoom, and I'm not a proponent of Zoom bombing like that, but during the early days when open meeting IDs with no passwords were required, I have to admit some of it was pretty funny. So, and if it would have happened to one of our meetings, I probably would have got a pretty good laugh out of it. I don't know. So I think it's pretty funny.
Yeah. Funny, except when it happens in little kids in schools, and some very disturbing videos have been shown. Yeah. I really wish we could get that out to teachers to say, here's what you need to do. I don't know how to get that out to everybody. Say, no, just get a password and set up the room so you can't get in, and try to help those people out. But everyone else is fine.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. I think that, if you're doing that ridiculous level of stuff with kids, then that's a whole different game where you just, same as trying to malware or ransomware a healthcare organization during this time. Like, just those are a few people that probably don't need a trial. Take them out to the woodshed. So let's cut away a little bit from the tech side of talking to the techs and what to look for from a leadership role. And when you have your pen test engagements or even educational engagements, what are the types of topics that are coming up with these maybe non-technical leadership types that you're having to kind of bring up to speed on these type of topics? What are some of the things that they ask you about, or that you're finding that you need to kind of raise to them as an educational topic?
I think my classes have been a lot of different types of people, but more either security people, developers, pen testers. I even had Cisco salespeople, but a lot of different people, but not necessarily at that executive level. I think where I dealt with executives was more within companies and trying to explain cloud issues to them, and just seeing all the different types of decisions that lead to a breach from both the perspective of, running a team and dealing with various teams trying to do different things in different ways, some more secure than others. And also, I was on the Capital One Cloud team, and a huge organization, lots of security people, lots of different things going on, and trying to deal with we were one of the first banks to move, probably the first major U.S. bank to move to the cloud. So it was kind of breaking new ground and trying to figure out how everything should be done. And there's just a lot of decision making going on that I witnessed. It was really interesting. And so I think one of the reasons I wrote my book was I want to try to influence those decision makers to have a base understanding of security and make better decisions. I think that not understanding how exposure to the internet affects systems is one thing. I think the Capital One breach was really interesting. It showed, I think it was the first breach that I saw where someone actually pivoted in the cloud in a major way and got a lot of data. A lot of the breaches before this has just been like, we just left everything open so you can go get it. So that was a really interesting breach. So I think personally, I just want executives to understand that the more chances you give an attacker by leaving these things open, the more likely you're going to have a breach, and how can we reduce those chances. So I don't know if I've actually gotten executives coming to ask me. Is one of them trying to tell people at the executive level, here's what you need to be aware of, and here are the things you can ask your security team to make sure that you are less exposed than other companies.
Well, knowing full well that every company right now, especially, is working at some reduced level of whether it's employees, financial resource, whatever the case might be. Recently I heard of a story where somebody said, "Hey, I went to my boss and said, here's our 29 vulnerabilities," and the boss said, "Hey, we never had vulnerabilities till you got here. Why are you?" And her answer was, "Well, that's because you just hired me. Nobody knew how to look for them. You've always had them, but nobody knew to tell you." So, I mean, do you see that type of response still being the status quo even before COVID, or maybe even ongoing? Is it, "Well, I never had a problem until you told me about it"?
That's pretty funny. I didn't have that specific problem, or I didn't see that specific problem, but as a software developer for many years, just going through and watching how decisions are made, when the rubber hits the road and a product needs to get out, I've so many times seen someone just say, "Well, no, we need to ship," and my feeling was it would take too long, and they probably don't want to listen at that moment to explain the impact of that security decision, and that's why I wrote a book about it, because it's kind of long and involved, and there's a lot of nuances to it, to explain the impact of those decisions and why you may have not seen these problems in the past and now you do. You just weren't looking. That's actually a really good point too, and that's what I try to help people understand in the book. How are these things happening at a really executive level that they can understand.
The only thing I think I ever want to write a book about are all the either comments or memes I've ever seen about IT, and just a book of photos of memes and quotes of things like that, or I can't find any key button or anything like that. I think that's gonna. I've never written a book, but I think if I do, it has to be that. And I think there's an endless trove of that. I mean, I could probably, what was the Art of War? How long that book was, and mimic that book with just security quotes or IT quotes. But it's interesting too. It's interesting to hear that across the board. Whether I've always been on the IT technical side. I've never been a programmer of any major stretch. I've never written code outside of what I need to do any kind of pen testing. But to hear someone say, "Yes, we're going to put this out. We know that there might be some stuff, but don't tell me about it," is interesting. It sounds like a lot of that. "Well, I didn't have a problem until you told me I had a problem."
Yeah.
That's too funny. It's coming up on just about 38 minutes here of our time today. Teri, I got to tell you, I appreciate all the time and the effort to get connected with me. You mentioned earlier a time or two about your book. So let's take a minute. Let's talk about that book, what it is, where people can find it, the topics that you might cover in there.
Yeah, so I spent a long time learning security, and I actually got into security because I had a breach in my first company, which I ran for probably 15 years, 10 years full time. And it's where I really kind of became obsessed about security. And when I had that breach, there was no one around me to tell me, what happened, how it worked. I was working with a hosting company who knew less than I did. And so part of this book is for all the people who want to understand basic security. It's in there. It tells you kind of the fundamentals. It explains a lot of things that people sometimes, misunderstand from the headlines in the news. There's a lot of stories, so hopefully it's not boring. I hope it's not boring. And I go into, things that I learned along the way. And I also incorporate not only those fundamentals, but how do things change in the cloud? And, what sort of differences do we need to think about? And also the opportunities that the cloud can bring. And when I say that, I'm talking about the sort of the IaaS cloud environments where you can programmatically go in and automatically fix problems that happen repeatedly instead of looking at them manually, and use a lot of automation to try to improve your security posture. And then I also go into one of the things that I think, this is a personal viewpoint of security. I worked a lot in financial applications. I look at how people manage their money, and I think that we can manage data in similar ways. I think we can have better metrics and measurement of how we're dealing with our data. So at the end, there's some information about that. So that's kind of the book in a nutshell. I just want to help people who are trying to understand security, kind of at the executive level, so it doesn't get too technical.
I'm going to guess it's available on Amazon?
Yeah, it's available out there on Amazon, called Cybersecurity for Executives in the Age of Cloud.
Right on. And for those of you listening, we'll send out a tweet with that direct link to that site on Amazon, or that page on Amazon. So we'll definitely see that. And you'll see it out on, if you follow Teri on Twitter. Talk a little bit while we've got a minute, if you can. Tell us a little bit about Second Sight Labs, what you guys do there, and how that kind of came to be.
So a couple years ago, I got out of a particular job, and I had run 2 other companies. I thought, well, let's try this again. So I started my 3rd company, and I've been really passionate about cloud security for about 7, 8 years. I don't know how long now. And so I decided to focus on that because it's the thing I've been writing about and talking about the most, and trying to help people with. Also, somewhere along the way, Amazon made me one of their heroes, which is people who help out the community. And so I just decided to focus on cloud security. And one of the things that I mentioned were people making decisions incorrectly in terms of when they're launching products, or developers trying to decide how to do things. I thought there was a gap there for decision making in the cloud, and so I wrote my class for that purpose, to try to really focus on those things that cause breaches and help people understand basic security and also how the cloud works. So if you're a security professional, you learn how the cloud works. If you're a developer, you learn how to implement security in the cloud. And I did that probably most of my time last year was writing that class, improving the labs, getting out there, and of course then now we have COVID, and it's a class that I really like to teach in person. I've done it online a couple times, but I kind of stepped back from that this year a little bit and been focusing more on the pen tests and assessments. And right now we're working on some automation to really get more coverage and do that faster. I think there are different kinds of pen tests. So sometimes people come in and they try to test your team and say, well, did you see us? We were in your environment doing all these things and you never spotted us. We're not that kind of tester company. I like to use fuzzing. I like to come in and get as much coverage as possible. I want to find every misconfiguration, every gap. Obviously, you can't find everything, but we try to get a lot of coverage to find every security gap that we can using fuzzing and automation. And then additionally, with my background in software programming, I try to reverse engineer things as much as possible in the time frame to try to find specific flaws in applications. So that's kind of been the focus recently, and actually been having a lot of fun getting back to programming. I put a little bit of it in my RSA talk about how I was fuzzing the API, doing a lot more other things in terms of websites and cloud configurations. We also use a lot of open source tools with that as well. So that's kind of been the focus recently.
Well, I would say that you've been busy, and the 3 times the charm. It sounds like you're on a great path to get that third business moving. But I think it's probably fair to say in the IT world that if you were successful at starting the first one and got it moving well without failure, it probably was a rarity. I tried one and I thought, whoa, what? Let me back up. And yeah, so interesting to say the least to hear others.
Yeah, I definitely was nervous starting another company because, like you, I know what it goes into. It's not as easy as it looks. So, but it seems to be going well this time. So we'll see.
Outstanding. We have just about a minute left here with Teri. Teri, what's if anybody wants to reach out to you for just conversation or with Second Sight, what are the ways that somebody can catch up to you guys?
Probably the best way is, I like connecting with people on LinkedIn, Twitter. You can also go to our website and check that out. It's not fancy. Been really busy, but those are probably the primary ways to get a hold of me.
All right, and for those listening, check out our LinkedIn page and our Twitter feed, and we'll send out all those links again later this evening. Check us out on iHeartRadio, Spotify, whatever, Google podcasting software that you happen to like. If you have any questions for Teri after this, please send them my way or tweet me or tweet at Teri, and I'll make sure she gets them if you send them to me. So other than that, we're about the end of our time. Teri, thank you again. I can't really say enough, and hopefully when we start going live with these events that I'll have an opportunity to catch up to you in person and say hello. So thank you for coming on air with us tonight.
Thank you so much. That would be great.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, everyone, that is Teri. So tonight we are live here from until about another 5 minutes. And then tomorrow night, check out the pre-recorded interview that we held with an up-and-coming 12-year-old who is about to finish a master's degree at the University of Wisconsin at the age of 12, all in cybersecurity and all the things that just make me mad that took me 30 years to learn, and now all of a sudden this 12-year-old is pretty rock solid. So tune into that one tomorrow. That's pre-recorded, but that'll air tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Outside of that, I am David. I am the IT guy. I am out of here. Thank you for listening, and good night, everyone.